Blood trickles from my leg, warm against the damp moss, but I can barely feel it now. My hands shake as I press the radio to my mouth, hoping for some sliver of signal, some static that isn't just the wind roaring through the treetops. There's nothing but silence and my own ragged breath. If anybody picks this up, if an echo of these words ever finds another human ear, listen to me. Please, God, just listen. Don't go out here after dark. Not alone. Not ever. The woods change. I know how that sounds. You grow up in a place like this, spend your career walking old deer trails and counting stars through rain-soaked branches, you think you understand it. You tell yourself the noises are wind and the shadows belong to foxes. Something breathes in the dark, something that isn't animal, isn't human, isn't anything you want to believe is real. You'll want to believe the explanations. You'll need to. That's how you survived the first night. That's how I made it this far. But there are nights like this, when the forest closes in and nothing is right and your compass spins no matter which way you face. When footsteps echo between the trees and you realize you haven't seen a single animal in hours, just the press of damp earth and silence thick as oil. I keep replaying it, the moment the radio hissed, when I heard my own voice whispering back, except I hadn't spoken. Not yet. Now the battery's dying. My left boot is soaked in blood. I don't know how fast they move, or what triggers their patience to snap. Sometimes, if you hold still, they'll pass you by. Sometimes, all the care in the world won't change a thing. I keep remembering last year, how we found that backpack like it had been waiting, dry as bone, nothing inside but a snapped ID badge. Nothing above, nothing below, just the black gap between the rocks where the roots don't grow. This shift was supposed to be routine. 2 more nights and I'd have a long weekend in town. Hot food. Friends. The silence out here was always comfortable before. Now it's a velvet shroud. Something brushes past, close. Too close. Light doesn't work the same after midnight. You think your flashlight is strong enough, but the darkness eats it. You listen for the wind and it goes quiet, all at once. The world feels wrong, the way a room feels when someone is standing behind you, watching, waiting for you to make the first move. I tried to run. I did. My ankle twisted when the ground gave out. Tree roots coil sideways here, like they want to trip you, like the forest isn't just indifferent, but hungry. After sunset, it isn't just animals that wake up. There are old things here, older than trails, older than any name I can remember. My mentor used to warn me, never walk the same path twice at night. Never answer a voice if you can't see the speaker's eyes. Never whistle. God, if only I'd listened. I can hear them now, just past the edge of this little clearing, rustling through the needles and leaves, never snapping so much as a single twig. Sometimes I see a glimmer, yellow eyes, or perhaps only moonlight caught in dew, but I know what comes next. A flicker of movement between trunks, a sound like laughter, almost but not quite human, which is so much worse than a wolf or a coyote. Worse than anything we were trained for. If morning comes, and I'm not here, and you find this pack, or the battered shell of this old radio, or just my notebook, do what I never did. Turn back before twilight. Count your steps. Leave a mark at every turn. Listen to the old warnings, the old stories, the weird rules that every ranger passes down but none of us take seriously, right up until the night something calls your name from the black beyond your beam. Don't look back if you hear breathing. Don't stop if you see shapes shift between the trees. Don't ever believe you're alone out here. If anyone's listening, there's so much I should have said, so much I wanted to write down before I came out tonight. Maybe you'll forgive my cowardice, or maybe you'll call this a prank, brush it off like I did when I was green and the world was simple. Just, please. For your sake. For everyone who steps past the "no public access" signs and thinks the woods are just woods. Never trust the dark. Morning comes with a sharpness in the air that you only get at altitude, cold enough to keep the mosquitoes sluggish, bright enough to believe you're the only person alive for 100 square miles. I start every day before sunrise, coffee in a dented tin mug, steam curling into the blue silence. My cabin is just short of primitive: a cot, a logbook, a cracked window that always rattles when the wind comes down off Dogtooth Ridge. Outside, the forest waits. Sometimes chickadees flit between the branches as if they have news to spread, sometimes there's fog so heavy you wonder if you ever truly left your dreams behind. First radio check comes at 6 a.m. Dispatch is a woman named Marcy with a laugh like broken ice. She asks if I'm still alive, if I've seen any wandering tourists, if I'm keeping out of trouble. I tell her I'm mostly successful. There's a running joke that rangers are half scenery, half scarecrow, meant to keep the flora from getting too bold and the hikers from walking off ledges nobody mapped. I put on the green and the badge and pretend I own these woods, even though I know better. My circuit starts with Beaver Dam Trail, through patches where the grass is wet and the saplings have just begun to leaf out. Every so often, I check for fresh prints in the mud: deer, raccoon, the occasional bear that's wandered up from the lower valley. Today, I find claw marks on a birch, sap still oozing, birds silent for a quarter mile. All normal, I tell myself. Everything out here wants to eat, sleep, and be left alone. Even the quiet can be soothing, until you notice how total it is, how the world can hold its breath and not let it go for minutes on end. I log notes into my battered notebook, evidence of porcupine along White Pine Ridge. North Loop sign snapped again: repair before Labor Day influx. Remind search rescue about old culvert near mile marker 12. The mundane stuff stacks into a kind of insulation around my mind. When the sun is high enough to turn the dew to steam, I make small talk with the ravens or hum old country songs nobody else remembers. Sometimes Marcy sends a joke over the wire: got any campers run off with Bigfoot yet? I threaten to quit if she doesn't send me better coffee. It's a solitary job, but not a lonely one. The trees listen. The chipmunks gossip in rustles and chittering sprints past my boots. Every so often, I'll see a flash of orange quicker than I can raise my binoculars, gone before I get a real look. That's just the woods, I think. Place full of surprises. Around noon, I pull my lunch from my pack: peanut butter on store-brand crackers, an apple bruised as my pride after last fall's footing slip. While I eat, I check the tree line. The river bends out here are famous for black bears slinking down to drink, but today it's only the hush and the distant caw of a blue jay. My route takes me past Carter's Hollow, a spot the old-timers say gets strange when the shadows stretch. Nothing ever happens in broad daylight, but I note anyway, at the fork in the trail, the air feels denser, like weather changing without warning. Someone's twisted a length of twine into the branches, maybe a forgotten marker, maybe a prank. Last autumn, there was a rash of marker stacks, stones balanced in impossible ways, no footprints. Teenagers, probably. Still, I stop for a long look, rub the marking smooth with my thumb just in case. Mid-afternoon, I meet Pete from the station. He's only 3 years younger than me but acts like he owns the century. "You hear the weird calls last night?" he asks. Must have been a coyote chorus, sounded like kids screaming. I laugh it off, but we both remember the time search rescue found a backpack half turned to mulch, compass inside spinning as blades of grass. "Wouldn't want to be out here after dark," Pete says, grinning, but we both know he means it. Every ranger has a stretch of trail they'd rather not walk after sunset. Mine's a ravine near Widow's Post, thick with brambles and rumors. I don't tell Marcy or Pete that sometimes I skip that part, loop wider, claim I saw a downed tree blocking the path for the 3rd time this season. Once, I'd have marched straight through, badge first, singing to keep the shadows at bay. Now, I move a little faster as the sun dips, fingers brushing the radio clip to my belt. By 4, I'm circling back toward the main trailhead, where a minivan full of giddy city hikers is trying to extract a stroller from a muddy rut. I help, swap stories, warn them to be back before twilight, gently as I can. The woods are different after dark, that much is true. The light changes, tricks you with half-seen trails and phantom shapes on the horizon. Stay on the blazed path, I call as they shuffle away, and they dam up their laughter, at least until I'm out of earshot. Back at the cabin, I record the day. I double-check the locks, roll my ankle absently where the scar still aches. Sometimes, when the sky dims and the forest closes in, I feel the prickle of old warnings brushing the back of my mind. Some places in the woods, even the insects grow quiet before nightfall. I tell myself it's superstition, camp legend, but as the forest settles and the last birds sing, I wonder why nobody ever stays in Carter's Hollow after dusk. I wonder, and I try not to remember last winter's stories, or the way the wind keens through the ravine if you're unlucky enough to hear it. When the sun is gone, when the lamp inside rattles and tugs shadows across the floor, I close the logbook, cut the radio static, and tell myself I'll sleep soundly. It's just a job. Just another day. The forest knows me. I know the forest. Don't I? The call comes through just as I'm brewing one last mug of instant coffee, the kind that tastes like scorched bark and settles as a bitter weight in your gut. HQ to Ranger Owens, Marcy's voice crackles, a little too tense for end-of-shift small talk. Family at Oak Point says their son never checked in. Male, mid-20s, solo hiker. Supposed to be on the main loop since this morning. I set my cup down, feeling the old coil of adrenaline unspool in my chest. We get a few false alarms every year, cell service dies, time slips, someone forgets to leave a note on the windshield, but you never gamble with night in these woods. Copy, I answer. Last seen location. Marcy gives me the coordinates and I scribble them in the logbook, fingers already moving through routine. My flashlight is checked, boots laced tight, radio volume just loud enough to catch every word. By the time I step outside, dusk is clawing up through the trees, turning the road to molasses and the shadows to something thicker. HQ pings Pete 2, we rendezvous at the east trailhead. His face is drawn, pale even in the deepening blue. He nods at me, both of us too busy running inventories in our heads for much banter. Every missed hiker becomes a tally in your notebook, a weight you carry into the dreamless hours, whether the story ends well or not. Pete grips a map. Says he was heading for High Ridge Overlook. Trail markers are clean up to mile 4. Family says he does this loop every summer, never had issues. We start down the path, moving in silent agreement that sunlight is slipping away faster than it should. Crickets begin their chorus, louder than usual, as if warning whatever's out there to keep away. For a moment, the woods feel as familiar as breathing. Then I catch something, a glimmer of movement through the pines, gone before I can focus. It's probably nothing. Always probably nothing. I keep my grip on my flashlight, thumb hovering over the switch. He'll be fine, Pete says. His voice is too quick, too brittle. We both know what we're telling ourselves. We mark the last point the family saw him, scuffed boot prints, a candy wrapper folded into the dirt. From there, the trail loops downhill toward a creek then passes through Carter's Hollow. I suppress a shiver and forge ahead, radioing our progress at each bend. The underbrush thickens, shadows merge, and every step draws us deeper from the safety of the day. After half an hour, I hear it, a hollow ringing, like wind chimes caught in a breeze, only there's no wind now. Pete stops, frowns, then shakes his head. Local pranksters, he mutters, but his eyes dart, uncertain. We walk on, following faint impressions in the moss, a larger shoe print, tread stiffened by new mud. There's a spot where the print veers from the path, cutting toward the creek, much farther than any sane hiker should stray at twilight. We follow, calling out the man's name, Eric, each repetition swallowed into the tangle of trees and sentinel oaks. Each call sounds smaller, somehow. Around a bend, we find more footprints, but they're wrong. Too deep, toes dug as if running, paired with smaller tracks, like a deer's, but split oddly and circled by a strange, spiral groove I can't identify. I crouch, snap a picture for the report, and hope it'll all make sense come daylight. We press on, conversation thinning under the pressure of dark. Pete checks his old analog compass, swears softly. The needle's dragging. I try mine. The dial spins, drifts, then freezes. I tell myself it's just mineral interference, even as the pit in my stomach churns. The forest is too quiet now. Even the crickets have faded, leaving a hum in my ears that feels alive, probing. We pause near the creek. Pete kneels, points. There's a water bottle half buried in silt, beads of condensation still clinging to the plastic. The missing hiker's name is scribbled on the side with a black marker, proof he's not far ahead. When we radio this in, Marcy asks, any sign of headlamp light? We both glance up. There's nothing but swallowing dark and the scuffed blue-gray of post-sunset sky. That's when Pete mentions the stories, those old yarns about the lights in the forest. As a rookie, you laugh. The job ages you, though. Used to say there were foxfire will-o-wisps that'd lure you off the path, Pete says with a weak smile. I tell him to knock it off. We're both too old for fairy tales, but I can't suppress that crawling sensation along my neck. We trudge along the bank, our beams throwing warped shadows along the bank, making shapes that flicker and bend even when we stand still. Something snaps behind us, we whirl, breaths held. Only a branch, probably. Only a small animal disturbed. We write it off, resources spread thin between what we know and what we fear. Half a mile farther, we stumble across more traces, a torn strap, a dropped granola bar, all recent enough to make our hearts race. The woods are thickest here, branches interlaced so tightly that the last bands of light are strangled, leaving us in a cocoon of brittle blackness. Ahead, a faint glow pulses. For a breath, I think it's the missing hiker's flashlight, but as we approach, it fizzles out, nothing remains but afterimages dancing in our eyes. Pete whispers, time to call it in. I nod, thumb the radio, voice calm but taut. Still no visual, grounds disturbed, possible off-trail movement east of Carter's Hollow. Permission to pursue. Marcy hesitates on the line, then concedes. We press deeper into the dark, our breaths fogging, each step haunted by the sense that we're not following but being called forward, lured on by the hush at our backs and the whisper of branches slipping against one another. The woods feel less like earth and more like a great, watching animal, waiting for us to make a mistake. We pause, scanning for movement, for any sign of Eric. The radio hisses once, then falls silent as I murmur another call into the void. The air thickens, attention, electric but somehow ancient. I know, just know, this is where routine ends. The search has only just begun, and already, the woods are changing around us. We push deeper, stepping from evening's bruised light into a shadow that feels heavier than mere night. I watch my flashlight's beam fan out, barely denting the gloom, the trees now impossibly tall and close-pressed, ranks of sentinels shouldering us toward some unknowable center. Pete's boots crunch beside me, but every sound seems out of place, too sharp, too clear, and I realize I'm holding my breath. Above us, the wind sighs, but it doesn't reach the forest floor. Here, air feels still, close and dense as wet wool. Our radios emit bursts of static, lines blurring as if something is humming inside the frequencies. Pete tries to radio Marcy but his voice returns to us, garbled, chopped, just fragments of his own words echoing back, a bad loop, as if the forest has a mouth. Our calls for Eric dissolve in the hush. When we pause to listen, hoping for a response, we hear only the settling of pine needles, a distant thud that might be a deer, or something else entirely. The moon rises and makes silver fractures between the branches, but that light seems colder, almost sharp, and the trees cast overlapping shadows that slide over themselves, zigzagging where no wind stirs. We come to the edge of a clearing that shouldn't exist, a patch of pale grass ringed all around by birch, their bark ghost pale under the moon, their upper branches tied with tatters of soggy cloth. Pete kneels and examines the earth, it's scored with lines, some old animal marks, some curved like they've been scratched by something uncertain, something that doesn't know how to finish a spiral. He glances up. "Did you hear that?" I nod. "I heard it." The hush breaks, replaced by something it's hard to describe. Not a howl or bird call, but a warbling sound that shifts pitch, bouncing between trunks like it's searching for a shape to echo. It could be water, a distant creek, except we're too far from running streams and there's no scent of it on the air. Pete's face is unreadable, mouth a thin, determined line. He checks his watch, then taps it against his palm, frowning. "Can't be right," he mutters. "Didn't we check in only 10 minutes ago?" I look and realize half an hour has passed, maybe more. Our footsteps seem out of sync with time, looping us through the same patch again. A branch I snapped is whole, now fallen from another angle. I chalk it up to fatigue, or nerves, but somewhere inside, a new fear takes root. The animals are gone now. Even the insects. It's as if the forest is holding its breath. I whisper Eric's name again, but my voice sounds muffled, like the trees have grown closer, limbs bent to muffle human words. Pete swings his flashlight in a tight circle, but the light puddles and bleeds away, refusing to land on anything specific. I force us to press on. A splash of light movement draws us toward a low rise. Our radios stutter, a voice slicing through the static, neither mine nor Pete's nor Marcy's. "Turn back," it says, and breaks into a string of numbers, then silence. I glance at Pete. He's gone pale, sweat glistening even in the cold. "Old search frequencies," he hazards. No answer. We move on, the path wrinkling, twisting in ways I know it shouldn't. Branches snag our sleeves, and more than once, I swear I hear footsteps behind us, matched exactly to our own. Shapes flicker at the edges of vision, eyes reflecting, perhaps, or drops of dew, but always gone when we turn. The ground becomes choked with old roots, the earth soft underfoot, like a living thing that begrudges us every step. We stumble onto another marker, a strip of cloth tied around a sapling, printed with words, half faded. I try to read it, but the letters blur, twisting. Pete pulls me away, voice tight, "We need to turn around." I fight the urge to agree, to call it off, even while every survival instinct in my body screams to run. Then the smell hits, a rich, fungal rot, lingering where it shouldn't, as if the earth itself is fermenting or hiding something beneath its surface. Pete coughs. "This place isn't right," he whispers. I nod, unable to pretend. The air feels thick as syrup, sound sharpens, every crackle sounding deliberate. Suddenly, a chorus of animal cries erupts in the distance and then vanishes, replaced by that warbling hum. I can't tell if it's a voice or just the forest sick with secrets. We check our compasses out of habit, and again they spin, refusing north, the needles quivering like they're frightened, and I realize that beneath all the explanations, something deeper is wrong. The forest doesn't want us here. No animal would linger. Our own steps seem louder, echoing back double. Pete falters, reaching out. "Did you ever hear the story about the shadow that follows you home?" he asks. I shake my head, unwilling to hear it now. He grins, half mad, half afraid. Neither did I, not until I started working nights. At that moment, the wind finally moves, a single gust strong enough to make every leaf shudder and the trees sway as one. It sounds almost like breathing, low and patient. I catch a flicker, just at the edge, something tall and thin moving between the trees, soundless, impossible. Pete and I both freeze, afraid to look away, afraid to look too close. My radio clicks on, a voice I've never heard, whispered, urgent, and impossible to place. "You're trespassing," it says. Then only static. We stand, rooted, the road behind us invisible, the road ahead unknowable. In the silence that follows, I wonder if we're still ourselves, if the woods haven't already changed us, marking us as something that doesn't get to leave. With every step, we go deeper into the dark, hearts pounding as time itself seems to slip away. And above everything else, the unshakable sense we were welcomed in daylight only to be hunted after dark. We agree by unspoken consent to make camp where the path flattens. The two of us joined in uneasy partnership against the unknown. I've never liked overnighting out here, not when the trees crowd tighter with every hour past dusk, and not with Eric still lost somewhere ahead or behind us, but the forest gives us little choice. Pete's face is drawn, the lines around his mouth deeper than the shadows cast by the lantern light as we set a small perimeter. The temperatures dropped, each breath condensing in milky plumes. We work in silence, hands moving by rote as we unroll sleeping bags and lay out the few rations we remembered to grab. There's comfort in routine, the clink of the camp stove, the hiss as water boils, the careful way Pete cleans his knife. Yet the quiet doesn't relax, it presses in, too thick. Even the wind feels off, gusting in odd, measured pulses, never consistent, as if the trees themselves are controlling the air. I check the radio for a signal. Nothing but static, undulating in sync with the wind's rise and fall. Pete sits, arms wrapped around his knees, head angled so he can scan the dark beyond the lamp circle. "You ever meet Ranger Halverson?" he asks, voice hushed as if the trees are listening. I nod. I remember Halverson, burly and sharp-eyed even after 30 years in the Forest Service. They say he quit after that spring, never would work a night rotation again, Pete continues, thumb running over a frayed patch on his sleeve. When I was green, he told me, don't trust your ears out here after midnight. And never, ever follow a light you didn't bring yourself. The campfire flickers low, light throwing wild shapes across bark and stone. Something brushes my tent, deliberate, searching. My hand goes to my flashlight, others to the radio, both too slow to catch anything but the echo of movement. For a few moments, Pete and I sit in total silence, and then, faint and far off through the black, we hear it, a voice whispering, maybe words, maybe wind, rising, then cut off by the snapping of a branch. We both freeze. I mouth to Pete, "Do you hear it?" But he's pale, breathing shallow, eyes unblinking as he faces the dark. The voice comes again, closer now, not quite human, not quite animal, a sing-song cadence that makes the hairs along my arms stand straight. I fight the temptation to respond. The old stories say never answer. Never call back. Another wind rises, sharper this time, sending currents through the camp that make the lantern gutter, the flames stretching sideways as if pulled by invisible hands. We hear heavy footfalls, not animal yet not entirely like any human gait. Intermittent, circling, but always just far enough to stay in doubt. Shadows ripple at the tree lean, shapes that seem bipedal, thin as splinters, darting from one trunk to another. Pete grips his flashlight so tightly the plastic creaks. A minute later, quiet. Then laughter, or something mimicking it, blurring edges of sanity. The woods echo with it, a sound that bounces and rebounds, always distant and always wrong. Pete swears under his breath, knuckles widening. I radio HQ just for the comfort of my own voice, but the return is empty, the static replaced by a rhythm almost like music, almost like a heartbeat. After midnight, the disturbances escalate. Our food wrappers slide across the ground, as if nudged by unseen hands. Every now and then, twigs snap nearby, always just on the edge of the glow. I step outside, scanning with my light, heart pounding. Between two trees, for less than a second, I catch a figure, tall, limber, head turned at a tilt no living creature should manage. Its eyes reflect my beam with a sickly luminescence, gone before my mind can register detail. Back at the fire, I recount what I saw. Pete shakes. I told you. Halverson once found a tent ripped open. No tracks. No blood. Just drag marks leading into the underbrush, and he never talked about the sounds. He laughs, empty. He said the forest wants things at night. Sometimes it gives them back, sometimes it doesn't. It's getting harder to tell minutes from hours. My phone screen is foggy, the lock screen stuck. Pete's watch reads 12:07, forever. The moon passes behind clouds, plunging us into a darkness so complete it feels invented, made just for us. Somewhere out there, Eric could be walking, lured by voices or lights or his own reflection doubling back as a trick. We try to sleep in shifts, but every attempt ends in half-waking nightmares. I drift, eyes drooping, and hear children giggle just beyond my tent. Something scratches at the nylon, pausing, then dragging fingernails too long, too slow, to create a dreadful, deliberate rhythm. I whisper a prayer, silent and unremembered. Pete wakes me just before dawn, eyes rimmed red, face hollow. "Did you go out?" he asks. I shake my head, feeling ice in my stomach. "Thought I saw you standing just past the creek. Only it wasn't you." I stare at him, heart sinking. We wait for morning, counting down the minutes, but sunrise refuses to come. The woods have shifted again, paths are different, landmarks subtly wrong. We pack up, tired and unsure what's real. The wind stirs the trees, the voices fall silent. Our only certainty is this: something watched us all night. Whether it was hungry or merely curious is the question that will haunt me long after the sun eventually rises. Daylight brings little comfort. The forest doesn't brighten so much as pale, a wan glow filtering through tangled branches, everything just a degree off from normal. Pete and I break camp with hands that tremble, every muscle sore despite the lack of real sleep. The whole place smells different after the unnatural night, a sharp tang of sap, something hot and mineral and black beneath the needles. Our radios are cold and silent, nothing but low static even when we try to force a check-in with HQ. We plot our course on paper, lines crisscrossing familiar landmarks, but it's the space between those lines that claims our attention. The valley north of Carter's Hollow, the old section marked on every Forest Service map as simply restricted. Maybe once it meant an endangered species, old mine shafts, another ranger's rumor to scare off ATV joyriders. But no one goes there after dusk. The boundaries are unofficial, a few tarnished signs, rusted chain on the service road, but more importantly, a years-old warning in the forest culture itself: don't cross the ravine by moonlight, don't linger near the stone burns, and never, ever answer a voice you hear on the wind. But with Eric still missing and no trail leading back, not forward, there's nowhere else to look. Pete's face is stony, but I know the worry that sits behind his eyes. No hiker's ever gone in here without leaving something behind, but almost always, it's only a rumor: lost dogs, snapped packs, anxious dispatches that trail off as soon as the sun rises. We cross the first marker before lunch, a faded wooden post cuffed in strips of yellowed tape, the words danger barely visible beneath layers of lichen. In spite of ourselves, we both pause. "You believe any of this?" Pete tries to sound casual, but his voice quivers at the edges. "No," I lie. "But I respect it." He gives a short, tight laugh, the kind you use at a funeral. Almost immediately, things go sideways. First, Pete's compass begins to stutter, the needle quivering as if caught on a magnet, then spinning wide until north is lost. Mine follows. We switch to analog, nothing, same meltdown. Cell phones are useless this deep in the forest. Even animal trails look wrong, prints that begin and end abruptly, as if something heavy leapt 10 feet at a time, deer paths that wind in circles, a patch where the ground is packed flat but nothing, not even ant trails, disturbs its surface. By midday, sweat clings to us despite the chill. We're both hyper-aware of the forest silence, the high-pitched whine in our ears, maybe from nerves, maybe something else. Pete yelps, stops, clutching his calf. He limps to a fallen log and sits, breath hissing through his teeth. "It grabbed me," he says, voice low, as if ashamed to believe it. His sock is torn, skin beneath scraped bloody as though raked by tiny claws. I kneel to check. There's nothing nearby but a thick nest of roots, but no animal, no visible hole in the earth, nothing but the print of Pete's own boot beside the wound. "Must have been a root," he mutters without conviction, but I can see doubt crawling up his spine. We bandage the wound and debate, backtrack and risk losing Eric's trail or keep pushing deeper into the forbidden zone. The decision is made for us, a streak of red nylon caught on a bramble ahead, unmistakable against the green. It's Eric's pack strap. The ground here is churned, earth gouged by something heavy. The track disappears into the brush. We follow. This part of the forest is unfamiliar, a dim, shifting sea of trees, boughs woven so thick the sun reduces to a narrow ribbon. We pass under a tangle of branches scrawled with symbols, spirals and hatches, runes half remembered from grade school history, a language I don't want to learn. Pete whispers an old ranger saying, if you see a symbol you don't know, don't touch, don't stare, and never trace it with your finger. I keep my hands shoved deep in my pockets. Deeper in, the air changes again. There's a smell, ancient and sour, like forgotten roots or rust. At one point, I hear breathing that isn't my own. Not Pete's, either. Just outside our sight, a slow, drawn-out exhale, like the woods are taking measure of our fear. I call Eric's name, voice flat, but the echo is wrong. It doesn't bounce. It just stops. Pete's steps drag behind me. Another time, I'd urge him on, but now I simply hope nothing drags either one of us down. My radio flickers, emits a low squeal, and then, for a heartbeat, there's a voice, familiar, broken by static, I'm at the, and then silence. Eric's voice, or someone mimicking it. I grip the radio tight. Say that again. Eric, is that you? But all I hear is the wind, whistling through leaves so dry they sound like brittle bones. We emerge through a tunnel of saplings, bark slick with dew that's never warmed by sunlight, into a clearing different from any other in this whole forest. In the center stands a cabin, gray as bone, half swallowed by moss. Its windows are dark, the doorway collapsed, yet there's a tire swing on a low branch, swaying, moving without wind. I swallow, feel Pete draw up beside me, and together we stand, breathing shallow in the face of what feels like the heart of the forest secret. Approaching, my boots sink into earth soft and spongy, as if something underneath refuses to bear our weight. The cabin is old, older than any map structure, its boards carved with more symbols, names scratched by hands that might have belonged to rangers, hikers, or no human at all. A rusty axe leans by the door, the blade so pitted with time it seems grown from the roots themselves. Pete pulls out his flashlight, sweeping the dark windows. I hear the crunch of glass underfoot, the creak of the porch as we step up. Splinters prickle my palm on the banister, there are words, carved over and over again, do not stay. The letters run deep, deeper than any knife I've carried. The inside smells of smoke and animal musk, dust motes drifting in thick, lazy beams. On the far wall, a faded photo, two men in ranger uniforms, faces blurred by weather, stand with a hiker between them. All their eyes are scratched out. Underneath, another message, this one written in marker, return what was taken. Beside the fireplace, a pile of packs, old, newer, and something recent, the red strap unmistakably Eric's. The air throbs with pressure, a wild static that makes my ears ring. I think of the stories, cabins that aren't mapped, doors that don't always open the same way, time that slips sideways. Pete pushes further in, limping. There are scratches along the floor, the same spirals as outside, but in blood, dried now but clear. My hands sweat, cold and clammy. We should leave, Pete says, voice barely above a whisper. We won't find him if we stay. But even as he speaks, I see a flash through the back window, a shape, slow and lurching, man-sized, maybe, but dragging a leg, moving with purpose. My name grinds through the dark, whispered from everywhere and nowhere. Pete and I lock eyes, we both suck in a breath we'll be holding for a lifetime. Everything tells me we've gone too far, that the line we crossed is one we cannot uncross. Yet night is falling fast, the forest leaning in, the answer to the search so close we can taste it but held always, eternally, just out of reach. What waits for us here, what waits for anyone in the cabin at the heart of the restricted zone, is not something you solve. It's something you survive. Inside the cabin, the light is faint and feverish, slanting in through cracks in the roof and narrow gaps around warped window frames. Dust motes drift in slow spirals, catching the sharp scent of old wood, animal musk, and something buried deeper like iron and rot. Pete stands behind me, every movement careful and nervous. I can sense the pressure outside, a hush thickening, the way the woods go before a storm, as if the trees themselves are straining to listen. We split up, searching with jittery urgency. My boots echo across warped floorboards that give just enough to threaten a fall. I move toward the fireplace, where someone's left a scattering of notebooks, their covers grimy, pages curled by years of moisture and cold. The first journal snaps open to jagged handwriting, Night 3. Heard it call my name again. Light from the window, didn't look. Another entry, didn't bring a mirror, still saw faces. If I'm not here tomorrow, I went home the wrong way. I leaf through more. They go back decades. Names I half recognize from ranger logs, lost hikers' families each recounting glimpses, voices in the wind, warnings not to answer. In the margins, frantic sketches, spirals, trees bending in impossible arcs, a shape like a hinge, marked repeatedly with X's. Pete finds a battered tin trunk under a bench, struggles with the latch, and opens it to a pile of ID cards, some so faded the names are gone. The most recent, Eric Dalton. He swears, slamming the trunk shut, and I feel panic blooming. I try to steady my breath. At least we know he came this far, I say, but the words sound hollow, watery. On the far wall, a fresh message smeared in charcoal, IT walks when it wants. Sometimes alone, sometimes not. Do not stay here. Outside, the wind picks up. It's not the gentle shudder of branches but a focused sound, a long, rising note, like a whistle blown far away, refracted through the halls of these trees. Pete starts pacing, shoulders hunched. This doesn't make sense. Why keep coming back? Who would ever spend a night here? I try to answer but the words catch, stuck in the dry dust of my tongue. Suddenly, footsteps scrape across the porch, deliberate, steady. Pete and I freeze. I edge back from the window, flashlight off. Through a narrow crack, I see movement, a flicker, something tall, with the uncanny tilt of a person who's forgotten how to move like a person. For a moment I swear it's Eric, but the gait is all wrong, dragging one foot as if the woods itself has claimed him. Inside, the air thickens, panic surging between us. Pete's eyes are wide, glinting with something close to terror. Did you tell anyone we were coming here? He whispers. I shake my head. I want to say more, but outside, the footsteps stop at the door. The handle rattles, once, twice. Silence. Only the thud of my heartbeat pounding in my ears. We back up, searching for a weapon, a plan, something. Pete grabs the old axe from beside the hearth, knuckles white. I press my radio for HQ, but all that emerges is a warbling, echoey version of my own voice, repeating back not what I said, but what I was thinking. You shouldn't be here. You shouldn't be here. You shouldn't be here. We hear scratching on the side wall now, a kind of frantic clawing that travels along the outside, sometimes sharp, sometimes muddled. Pete's breathing gets ragged. I try to steady him with a look, but I can see his trust fray, doubt flickering behind his fear. Maybe it wants us to split up, he mutters. Maybe that's how it finds you alone. My own mind starts to spiral, memories of every campfire warning, every old ranger's tale, all the stories I pretended never bothered me. The cabin seems to shrink around us, walls pressing close. In the middle of the room, I notice something, the spiral pattern, not just drawn but carved deep into the floorboards, dark stains ringing each curve, burned in with heat or time or something older still. Each curl points straight to the center of the cabin, to a hatch nearly hidden beneath a mildewed rug. I kneel, against every instinct, and pull it back. There's a lock, old but twisted open. Pete shakes his head. Don't. But above us, the scratching turns to pounding. It's now or never. I pull up the hatch, glimpsing a darkness even blacker than the woods at midnight, and for a split second, I see shapes moving down there, nestled just below the surface, shifting like roots, like bodies, like memory turned to puppets. I slam the hatch closed as Pete stares, silent. The banging on the walls grows louder, closer, but the thing outside never breaks the door, just circles us, as if tasting our fear, feeding on rising panic. The warnings on the walls glare at me, every word underlined in haste or hate: do not stay, do not wait, do not trust the voices. It's clear now. Whatever keeps bringing people here, whatever walks the woods at night, it wants us isolated, frantic, doubting one another, broken down by fear. We square our backs to the wall, clutch what little hope we have, waiting for the next move, knowing dawn is still impossibly far away, and that our only chance is to outlast the secrets clawing at these walls. At first, it's just a pressure, like the hush before a thunderstorm, air so dense it presses against the cabin walls, pinning us in place. Pete and I exchange a look: rage, fear, determination, none of it sufficient for what comes next. The wind outside exhales and suddenly the room drops 15 degrees, cold settling in our bones. My teeth chatter in my skull, old scars throbbing as if the chill is crawling beneath my skin. In the eerie quiet, even our breaths seem to creak and stick. The first light appears out the window, a pale orb bobbing among the trunks, hovering just above the ground. Then another, and another, moving with intent, circling the cabin in a slow, deliberate pattern. Pete mutters a prayer, clutching the battered axe while backing toward the cold hearth. Frozen, I can barely think. My flashlight, nearly dead, casts a sepia wash against the walls but shows little else, just the frantic eyes of my partner and swirling dust. A pounding shakes the door. Not frantic or wild, but rhythmic, measured, a demand to be let in. The voices rise again, at first scattered, indistinct. I swear some are just children's laughter, others deep, ancient, echoing with the wrong sort of music. They chant, not in any language I know, but in a cadence that drills straight into my chest. We stagger back as the room starts flickering between shadow and blue-white glare. Every window now glares with the circling lights, their forms morphing, sometimes lantern-sized, sometimes stretching tall and thin into tapers of burning silver that pulse and twist. The temperature keeps falling. Breath condenses so thick it fogs the glass, frost lacing the inside of the panes. Pete shouts my name, points behind me. I turn and see the floorboards bulging, the spiral at the room's center glowing now with dim phosphorescence. The air smells metallic and sour, and beneath the pounding, there's a wet, slurping whisper rising from the opened hatch. I grab Pete's sleeve and pull him away as the spiral expands, each carved groove wriggling as if alive. There's a crash at the back window, the glass shatters inward. A light bursts through, sprawling like liquid across the floor, and when it dissolves, a shape stands in its place, a human figure, bare and featureless at first, but then the shadows wrap it in the tattered jacket I recognize from Eric's missing hiker profile. Eric's face resolves from haze, mouth too wide, eyes luminous, arms stiff at his sides. His lips part. "Help me," he rasps, but his tone is empty, words wrenched up from somewhere else. Pete lurches for the door but the handle's locked tight, the wood vibrating as another blow lands outside. I skirt the edges of the glowing spiral, trying to steer clear of both Eric's shape and the growing cold at my feet. "Eric, is that you? Who's out there with you?" My question is broken by a chorus of voices outside yelling our names. Just beyond the wall, dozens of rangers, hikers, family, people we know and don't know, each voice just a bit wrong. Pete and I both recoil, it feels like being torn in half by memory and dread. Eric's shape turns rigid and begins convulsing, joints snapping in and out of place, face jammed between terror and delight. For a terrifying instant, his fingers elongate, pulling ragged at the seams of his jacket, tips becoming almost root-like, questing toward the spiral. As if that signal is all it needs, the walls of the cabin pulse and bend. I watch the timbers waver, bark growing in reverse on older wood, grains running in all the wrong directions. A fresh wind howls, and with it, the lights outside breach the cabin's defenses, pouring in through every gap. The room is filled with blue fire, stinging, blinding, so thick I can't see Pete, can barely feel my own body. I am grabbed and flung sideways. The floor pitches and cracks, my legs scrape across broken glass and I feel teeth, was it a hand or a branch, catch at my boot. Sounds melt together, wind, voices, the suck and sigh of something ancient being dragged into the present. I crawl blindly, groping for Pete. My hand closes around a wrist, too cold, too thin. I pull, terrified, only to find myself grasping air. Through the blinding lights, shadows flick in and out, rangers, hikers, children, all cast in a strange, rippling half-life. Some bear old wounds, faces frozen in mid-scream, mouths moving silently. My ears ring. A terrible chorus rises, "You shouldn't have come here." The spiral flares bright, incandescent, and a fist of cold pins me to the floor. I'm forced to look into Eric's eyes, luminous and endless. "Return what was taken," the voice says, his, but not his, layered with a dozen others. In a desperate scramble, I snatch at the journals on the floor, anything to anchor myself. I shout Pete's name. He answers, somewhere across the room, breathless, I see it too. The cabin is no longer a place but a maze, walls blur and flicker, windows opening onto different views, sometimes the forest I know, sometimes landscapes I can't recognize, scorched and ash-gray, roots twining in the air. I see myself reflected in the glass, face pale beyond life, hair rimmed with frost, eyes wide and black. The room twists and tilts. Eric stumbles toward the hatch, face broken open into a look of longing and horror, as if something inside him wants to drag him into the pit below. The spirals whine, the cold turns painful, and the last thing I remember as I press forward is Pete's scream, echoing and rising over the sound of everything breaking apart at once. And then the lights burst, shattering into embers. A wave of numbness drags me under and the world collapses. I'm thrown backward into an orchard of memories that don't belong to me, old disappearances, soft laughter turning to screams, the feeling of being hunted by the very ground beneath my feet. I wake in utter dark, shivering, every muscle screaming. I don't know how much time has passed. The cabin is quiet except for my own ragged gasps. Pete is gone. Eric is gone. My radio is hissing nothing but static and throatless laughter. Through the ragged hole where the door used to be, night presses in unbroken, cold and ancient and watching. I crawl out, crawling not so much by sense as by instinct, desperate for the clean air outside. The woods have changed shape around the ruins of the cabin. I realize in horror I may never find my friend or myself again, not fully. Behind me, the spiral still glows with impossible light, promising I have only barely begun to understand what I've seen. This is how the forest teaches you what darkness truly means, scattering your mind, taking your name, giving you back to yourself changed, if you're lucky enough to make it out at all. I pull myself through the splintered doorway, shards of old wood biting into my palms. The night outside is absolute, a black so thick it feels like pushing through wet cloth. Every step I take sinks into the earth, the ground yielding like something alive beneath my boots. My legs shake, but I force them forward, each stride a silent prayer that I might outrun the sound still echoing behind me, the splintering of walls, the rise and fall of that inhuman chorus, the wet whisper of something dragging across the floor. I call for Pete, my voice raw, swallowed almost instantly by the dark. Only an answer comes back, a distant cry, broken and terrified, cutting off too quickly. I run toward the sound, crashing through underbrush that seems to reach for my ankles, branches scraping my face like cold fingers. Every shadow looks solid, every gust of wind sounds like footsteps. The forest has become a maze, the familiar trail now impossibly twisted. In the chaos, I stumble into a clearing. Moonlight breaks through the canopy for the first time in hours, casting silver patches on the ground. For one lurching moment, I feel hope. Maybe I can navigate by the stars, find my way back to the service road, reach the ranger station. But as I turn to head north, the light flickers and dims. The trees lean inward, their branches interlacing overhead until not even a sliver of sky remains. Something brushes the back of my neck. I spin, flashlight beam slicing through the gloom, catching only the afterimage of movement, a silhouette ducking behind a trunk, too fast, too fluid. I shout into the dark, defiance mixed with terror. No answer comes, just the sound of breathing that isn't mine, shallow and patient. I press on, but the forest fights me at every turn. The ground slopes downward without warning, forcing me to catch myself on exposed roots that feel more like bone than wood. I slip, tumble, and land hard against something solid, an old stone marker, half buried in moss, carved with symbols I recognize from the cabin walls. My blood runs cold. I'm running in circles. Panic claws at my throat. I drop to my knees, forcing myself to breathe, to think. The old ranger's advice surfaces in my mind: mark your path, leave something behind. I tear a strip from my sleeve and tie it to a low branch, a beacon for myself or anyone who might follow. Then I close my eyes, blocking out the chaos, and listen. The forest has a rhythm, I realize, a pulse beneath the silence. I tune into it, letting the sway of branches and the distant murmur of water guide me. Slowly, painfully, I force my legs to move. Each step is a battle against fear, against the whisper in my head that insists I'm being watched, followed, herded. Hours pass, or minutes, or seconds. Time has become meaningless. I lose myself in the mechanical act of walking, one foot after another, until suddenly the trees thin and I stumble onto a road. Not the service road, something older, rutted and overgrown, but solid beneath my feet. I collapse against a tree, chest heaving, staring at the pale strip of asphalt that promises civilization. Voices drift toward me, faint but distinct. I force myself upright, legs screaming in protest, and follow the sound. Ahead, through a gap in the trees, I see lights, lanterns, flashlight beams swinging in wide arcs. I stumble toward them, shouting until my voice breaks. A figure emerges from the shadows, another ranger I half recognize from the station. Behind him, two more silhouettes, Pete, leaning heavily on a younger recruit, face ashen and eyes vacant, and a woman I don't know, her hands wrapped in bloody bandages. We made it out. All four of us. But as I look at Pete's hollow stare, at the tremor in the woman's fingers, at my own hands shaking uncontrollably, I understand, we didn't just escape. We were let go. The forest released us the way a cat releases a half-dead mouse, not from mercy, but because it can always hunt again. The walk back to the station takes forever. Every sound makes me flinch. Every shadow seems to move. Pete doesn't speak, doesn't look at me. When I try to take his arm, he flinches as if I'd burned him. The woman, her name is June, I learn later, keeps muttering about voices in the trees, about a face that wore too many smiles. Dawn arrives slowly, reluctantly, as if the sun itself is afraid to face what happened in those woods. By the time we reach the station, the official story is already forming: equipment failure, disorientation, an overnight storm that knocked out communication. No mention of cabins or spirals or lights that walk. No mention of Eric, still somewhere in that black heart of the forest. I sit on the porch, watching the sky lighten from gray to gold. My hands won't stop shaking. My mind keeps returning to the hatch, to the shapes I saw writhing beneath it, to the face that wore Eric's features like a mask. Was any of it real? Can any of it be explained? The forest still stands at the edge of the parking lot, trees swaying gently in the morning breeze. From this distance, it looks peaceful, even beautiful. But I know better now. I know what waits in the dark between those trunks, in the hollows of those hills, in the spaces where the light can't reach. I survived. But I'm not the same person who walked into those woods yesterday. Something stayed behind in that clearing, in that cabin, in the spiral carved into the floor. Something that whispers when the wind blows through the trees, that watches from every shadow, that waits with a patience older than the trees themselves. The forest changes after dark. And now, so do I. The days that follow are slow and uneven, filtered through a haze that clings to everything. At the station, everyone moves quietly, as if afraid to speak too loudly. Pete barely meets my eye, withdrawn and brittle, his voice hollow if he speaks at all. June sits in the break room for hours, hands wrapped in fresh bandages, eyes losing focus whenever conversation drifts to the forest or the lost hiker. The new recruit, Miller, keeps fiddling with his wedding ring, staring out the window when he thinks no one watches. The official paperwork fills my desk by the inch. Search logs, incident reports, accident forms, all stripped of the night's impossible details. The radios. Electronic failure due to moisture. Eric's disappearance. Presumed lost off trail, all efforts ongoing. My own account reads like fiction: compass malfunction, disorientation, extreme weather events. Nothing about the lights, the whispers, the spirals. Not a word about the cabin. Late at night, Pete and I meet on the porch while the world's asleep. We talk in fits and starts, circling the truth. When we compare notes, our memories twist. I remember sunrise breaking as we reached the road. Pete insists the sky stayed black as pitch until we saw the station lights. June recalls a woman guiding her hand through the woods, singing in a language she'd never heard before, face never visible except when the stars vanished. Miller swears he saw Eric in the brush, smiling gently, waving him farther from the path before dissolving into shadow. Pieces don't fit. Some threads match, others unravel. Pete claims we camped at the old post near the boundary. I know we stopped by the creek, the sound of water never far away. June refuses to describe the faces she saw in the windows of the abandoned cabin, but sometimes she jerks awake during her coffee, stares at the walls, trembling. The lines of reality, once sharp and ordered, are now as warped as the spirals scratched onto the cabin floor. Within a week, we start losing people. Miller is the first. He walks in one morning, hands in his parka pockets, eyes raw with sleeplessness. "I'm sorry," he says, "I can't keep doing this. Every shadow looks like it's watching. Every time I close my eyes, I'm walking that trail again." He leaves his badge on the counter and doesn't look back. June puts in for transfer the following Monday, officially citing her injuries, unofficially whispering that she'd rather take city noise than listen to the wind in the trees for the rest of her life. She hugs me, but her arms squeeze too hard, as if she needs to be certain I'm real. Pete lasts a little longer, suffering in silence, carrying the stories in his eyes. After a month, he too is gone. "I can't work nights," he tells me, and fills in his resignation in bold, unsteady script. I try to return to routine, morning patrols, check-ins, coffee with Marcy as she asks, "How are you holding up out there?" Every answer is a lie. I lose the habit of sleep. The smallest noises yank me upright in bed, rustling limbs, foxes shrieking, sometimes just the wind moving through pines. Sometimes, late at night, I swear I see lights shifting between the trees, pale and restless. HQ closes the investigation with a thick stack of inconclusive files and a soft promise that these things happen in wild places. The locals already have their stories. Hikers whisper of ghost lights, old rangers warn newcomers about bad ground and trails that wander. The woods go back to their old rhythms, swallowing up the truth as easily as they swallow a careless step. By the end of spring, 3 rangers gone, resigned, reassigned, just missing. I clean out lockers. The station grows quieter, echoing with too many empty chairs. Sometimes I sit in the office at dawn and listen to the faint drone of the radio, willing myself to believe it was all exhaustion, too many stories and not enough sense. Some days, I nearly believe it. Other days, the spiral haunts my dreams, Eric's face flickers in the periphery, and the woods outside seem to move in ways only I can perceive. The forest is patient. It waits for me as surely as it waits for the next unlucky hiker, the next curious ranger. Out the window, as night falls again, the trees stand in silent ranks, and I know, not everything that was lost in the dark really came back. I sit here tonight, alone in the same wooden cabin where I started and ended so many shifts, feeling the last warmth of sunset fade through dirty window glass. My uniform still sits by the door, boots lined up out of habit, radio humming softly on the table, a steady, meaningless hiss that reminds me the world is still out there, tuning in and tuning out. I want to believe what happened last fall was a trick of exhaustion, compounded fear and weather and the strange geometry of wild country. Part of me even wants to believe I was simply lucky to make it out at all. But if you're listening, if you found this notebook, if you're scrolling late at night, or if you're out here, just inside the first line of pines, waiting to see if the forest is everything you imagined, listen closely to what I am about to say. It isn't the wildlife you need to worry about. Not the storms, not the cliffs or even the bone-deep cold. It's what you don't see. It's what changes, slowly at first, then all at once, when the sun slips away and the shadows stand at their tallest. There are patches of this forest older than memory, old enough that the ground remembers footprints long after the feet are gone. Some places don't want to be found, and some seem to want you to get lost. That's the truth no one puts in the brochures, no old ranger will admit to a rookie, no official will acknowledge in a report. But it's a truth you feel in your gut, in your bones, when twilight stretches and the paths you thought you knew curl away under your boots. Trust it. Trust your unease. Trust that you are being watched, because here, after dark, you are. I used to laugh at stories, lights between the trees, voices calling out unfamiliar names, cabins that appeared and vanished, people returning not quite right. I believed in maps and compasses, data and routine. I was wrong. Some places will bend to your rules by day, but at night, they remember what they really are. Don't ignore a chill on the back of your neck. Don't follow singing deeper into the woods. Don't walk toward lights that seem too still. And never, under any circumstances, stay in a place that warns you to leave. As I write, the radio crackles, a burst of static, a half glimpse of a voice that sounds like my own, then nothing. I look outside. Along the tree line, thin lines of cold white light flicker in impossible patterns, slow and deliberate, pausing, then drifting deeper between the trunks. Just like before. The old fear creeps back, burning up from my stomach through my throat, dry and metallic. I think of all the warnings etched onto old cabin walls, all the journals filled in frantic, looping script. Out back, headlights appear at the edge of the service road, swinging through puddles, tires crunching on loose gravel. A young ranger climbs out, backpack swinging, shoulders squared in the fading sunlight. She pauses, looking into the dark as if measuring it, then starts down the same trail into the trees, headlamp bobbing, humming quietly to herself. I want to shout a warning, to tell her to wait for morning, to share everything I've tried to forget. But I just sit, hands shaking, unable to speak against the weight of what waits out there. Some lessons must be learned on your own. Some woods will teach you whether you meant to learn or not. So wherever you are, whether tonight you are safe at home or standing between trees with the wind tugging at your sleeves, if you see strange lights in the woods, if you hear a voice that sounds almost like someone you know, if the path under your feet starts twisting in ways you can't explain, turn back. Mark your steps, go home, and never trust the dark. I watched the young ranger's headlamp vanish between the pines and, for a moment, the lights in the woods flicker brighter, tumbling, inviting, as the night opens up and the forest begins to change once more.